नमस्कार, स्वागत है आपका आपके क्लास में। In the previous class, we discussed a few poets and prose writer, essayist like Erasmus, Sir Thomas Malory, and Sir Thomas More. Today, I will discuss with you Turtle's Miscellany, first comedy and first tragedy. These 3 points are to be discussed in today's class. So let's start with the magnum opus, Turtle's Miscellany. Turtle's Miscellany. Miscellany means miscellaneous, and Turtle means who was Turtle. Turtle was not the poet, he was not the essayist, he was not the dramatist, but Richard Turtle was the name of the publisher. Richard Turtle was the name of the publisher, and he published an anthology of poetry in 1557. Before the arrival of Queen Elizabeth to the throne, Elizabeth became Queen of England in 1558, और उसके एक साल पहले इन 1557 ये वर्क टर्टल्स मिसालिनी पब्लिश हुआ था। और टर्टल्स मिसालिनी इज नॉट मेयरली एन एंथोलॉजी ऑफ पोएम्स, इज नॉट मेयरली अ कलेक्शन ऑफ पोएम्स, बट टर्टल्स मिसालिनी इज द इनॉगरेटेड ऑफ एलिजाबेथन पोएट्री। ड्यूरिंग द रेन ऑफ क्वीन एलिजाबेथ, England was known as the nest of singing birds. There were a number of poets, a number of dramatists who were writing verse dramas, number of sonneteers, right? But उन सब की शुरुआत करने वाले, सबको इनिशिएट करने का जो कलेक्शन था, उस कलेक्शन का नाम था टर्टल्स मिसालिनी. रिचर्ड टर्टल being the publisher, he being the printer, right? पब्लिशर था और प्रिंटर था. और the poems that were published in the Turtle's Miscellany were written somewhere around 1530s, and in the first edition of 1557 there were total 271 poems. Right? The first edition of Turtle's Miscellany included 271 poems by different writers. Richard Turtle was a publisher, और उनका जो मेन काम था, his main business was the publication of law textbooks, but his biggest contribution to English literature would come in the form of anthology of poetry, जिसको आप टर्टल्स मिसालिनी के नाम से जानते हैं, जिसको आप टर्टल्स मिसालिनी कहते हैं. He also gave the public, आज इसके अलावा भी उन्होंने कुछ वर्क्स पब्लिश किए थे, जिसकी बात मैं भी करूंगा. फिलहाल पहले फोकस कर लेते हैं इसी पर. The first edition of Turtle's Miscellany was published on 5th June 1557, right? With the title क्या थी टर्टल्स मिसालिनी की? जब 1557 में पब्लिश हुआ था तो इसका नाम था सॉन्ग्स एंड सॉनेट्स, राइट? द नेम ऑफ टर्टल्स मिसालिनी वाज सॉन्ग्स एंड सॉनेट्स, मींस द collection, the volume consists of songs and sonnets, और दोनों मिलाकर के टोटल 271 poems, none of which had जो है ever been printed before. Songs and sonnets was the first of the poetic anthologies that became popular by the end of 16th century and is considered to be Tottel's great contribution to English letters. It was also the last large use of sonnet form for several decades in published work until the appearance of Sir Philip Sidney's work Astrophel and Stella, followed by Edmund Spenser's Astrophel. राइट, तो ये सबसे ज्यादा सोनेट पब्लिश करने का वर्क था और आफ्टर 1557 around 2 decades nothing significant was written in the form of sonnet in the form of poetry and included in Elizabethan canon. राइट, ये 20 years तक, अगले 20 years तक जो है एकमात्र बॉस बना रहा in the field of poetry, in the field of literature. Most of the poems included in the anthology were written in the 1530s or around 1530s, but none of the poem was published earlier. कोई भी पोयम पहले छपी नहीं थी. Many of them और तो ऐसी थी कि they were published posthumously. Even writers, poets भी नहीं रह गए थे और जो मेन कंट्रीब्यूटर्स थे इस वॉल्यूम के वो थे सर हेनरी होवर्ड एंड दूसरा का नाम आपको पता है सर थॉमस याट. दे वर द मेन कंट्रीब्यूटर्स. सर थॉमस याट एंड सर हेनरी होवर्ड. Sir Henry Howard is also known as Earl of Surrey. Right, also known as Earl of Surrey, and these two were the major contributors to the volume. There are in total 54 actual sonnets in the poem. Right, there were total 54 actual sonnets in the volume. Right, the title suggests that there were songs and there were sonnets and there were around 54 sonnets. Total 54 sonnets उसमें थे and these include 9 from unknown authors, 3 from Nicholas Grimald, 15 from Surrey and 27 from Yacht. सर थॉमस याट का जो कंट्रीब्यूशन था आउट ऑफ 54 इसमें 27 इनका था. सर हेनरी होवर्ड कंट्रीब्यूटेड 15 sonnets to the volume and the third name that I told you, his name was Nicholas Grimald and he had written 3 sonnets. Nicholas Grimald wrote 3 sonnets and 9 sonnets were written by unknown authors. Means 9 sonnets were anonymous. Nine sonnets were anonymously written. Right? The incorporated poetry had numerous comments on religion covering Catholicism, Protestantism and the English Reformation. Later editors of the early modern period then took out many of these religious references. Right? So these were the important poets, these were the important contributors to the miscellany and their contributions in the form of sonnets were 54 and out of 54, 27 by Sir Thomas Yacht, 15 by Sir Henry Howard, 3 by Nicholas Grimald and 9 sonnets were anonymous. Right? Both Sir Thomas Yacht and Sir Henry Howard were heavily influenced by Italian poetry. And Sir Thomas Yat is credited to have brought the sonnet stanza form from Italy to England. Right? ये स्टेंजा फॉर्म जो सोनेट फॉर्म था स्टार्टेड बाय पेट्रार्क इन इटली, इसको इंग्लैंड में लाने वाले थे सर थॉमस याट, एंड ही रोट 27 sonnets in imitation of Italian sonnets, in imitation of Petrarchan sonnets. Right? ये इनका कंट्रीब्यूशन है कि he was the first who used Italian sonnet form in English. Petrarchan sonnet form is very much complicated and it is not easy for one and all to write poems in octave and sestet. And that's why, to make it easy, his contemporary, Thomas Yat's contemporary, Sir Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey, modified the Petrarchan sonnet और modify करके उसको English sonnet बना दिया. He divided the 14 lines into 3 quatrains and coupled it with alternate rhyming AB, AB, CD, CD, EF, EF, GG. So this was the contribution of Sir Henry Howard with the help of his 15 sonnets. Right? He wrote only 15 sonnets. Shakespeare wrote 154 sonnets in the same manner as was suggested, as was told by Sir Henry Howard. That's why the sonnet form that Sir Henry Howard developed is called Shakespearean sonnet. Right? उसी को Shakespearean sonnet कहा जाता है, उसी को English sonnet कहा जाता है. So this was the main contribution of Sir Henry Howard. The star poets of Tottel's Miscellany, the Earl of Surrey, created the English sonnet form by modifying the Petrarchan sonnet. If the English sonnet is also called the Shakespearean sonnet, that can be attributed to Shakespeare's fame. The form which Surrey created 3 quatrains in alternate rhymes and a concluding couplet is easier to write in English than the Petrarchan form with its more complex rhyme scheme. Petrarchan sonnet की जो rhyme scheme है, it is ABBA, ABBA, CDC, CDC, or sometimes CDE, CDE. Right? So it was a bit tough, it was a bit complicated for the new poets, right? For Sir Henry Howard himself, and that's why he modified and made it English. Right? Sir Thomas Wyatt's inclusion in Tottel's Miscellany would mark the first time this poet's work was printed. 2 of Surrey's poems had already printed, but Sir Thomas Wyatt's first publication, his works saw the first sun in Tottel's Miscellany. Right? He was not earlier published, but Sir Henry Howard's 2 poems were published earlier. Right? Other contributors includes आज है Nicholas Grimald, तो है ही है Thomas Norton, John Haywood, Edward Somerset, ये other contributors हैं. और as far as your examination is concerned, right, the names of other contributors can also be asked. Your examination is also very much complicated, like Petrarchan sonnet, so you have to be prepared for those names as well. I wrote 3 names here, are right, Sir Thomas Yat, Sir Henry Howard, and Nicholas Grimald, and I am going to write a few more names who contributed in Tottel's Miscellany. जिनका कंट्रीब्यूशन था Tottel's Miscellany में, उनमें थे Thomas Norton, Thomas Vaux, Edward Somerset, John Haywood, right? 3 के बाद 4, 5, 6, 7, right? ये मेन कंट्रीब्यूटर्स थे Tottel's Miscellany के. और इसके बाद बहुत सारी पोएम्स हैं the writership or the authorship hat is uncertain. Among these unknown authors, it is believed that Geoffrey Chaucer wrote at least one of the poems titled in the anthology as To Lead a Virtuous and Honest Life. Right? The first edition of Turtle's Miscellany 1557 featured 40 poems by Surrey. Right? ये 15 सॉनेट्स थे, 40 पोएम्स इसमें सरे की थी. सॉन्ग्स एंड सॉनेट्स में 15 सॉनेट्स, 40 पोएम्स बाय सरे, 96 पोएम्स बाय यॉट, 96 poems by Yott and 40 poems by Grimald. 40 poems by Grimald. Means these three were the lion's share इन्हीं के पास था. Right? 95 poems written by unknown authors. Right? 95 poems जो है वो अननोन ऑथर की थी. 96, 40, 40 और 95 टोटल जोड़िएगा कितना हुआ है. 95 प्लस 96 ये हो गया 181 एंड देन 80 261 हो गया और टोटल जो है 271 पोएम्स थी इसमें. टोटल जो है मेड नोट दैट ऑफ दोज एनोनिमस पोएम्स द ऑथर्स वर श्योर टू इंक्लूड Thomas Churchyard, Thomas Vaux, Edward Somerset, John Heywood and Sir Francis Bryan. It has been decided definitely that of those 95 poems, 2 were written by Vaux, 1 by John Heywood and 1 by Edward Somerset. Right? Means they contributed very little. Right? They contributed to the Turtle's Miscellany very little, but their poems are there. That's why their names are also important as far as Turtle's Miscellany is concerned. Right? The next 7 editions were all printed between 1558 and 1586, with the final 9th edition being published in 1587. Right? 1587, that was the 9th edition. Right? Initial edition there were 271 poems. In the second editions very जो है few poems by Nicholas Grimald जो है हटा दिया गया था, but some others were incorporated in the volume और इसलिए फिर संख्या उनकी जो है उतनी ही रह गई. Clear? So that's all from Turtle's Miscellany. If any question, any doubt, you can ask your question, you can raise your point, then I will definitely respond to you and then I will proceed. And from this point I went back 5 years or 7 years back, and that is the time for first comedy. No question? Okay. Ralph Ruster Duster. Ralph Ruster Duster is the first comedy of full length in English. Right? Ralph Raster Duster is first full length comedy in English, based on the Latin playwrights Plautus and Terence. Plautus and Terence were the role models for English comedy dramatist, and Seneca was the role model for English tragic dramatist. Right? Plautus and Terence were Latin dramatists, and the first comedy was based on Terence and Plautus. Based on Terence and Plautus, and Ralph Raster Duster was written by a school teacher, and the name of the school teacher was Nicholas Udall. Nicholas Udall, Udall, and it is supposedly the first full-length comedy. When I talk about full-length comedy, it means it was divided into acts and scenes, and there are 5 acts in the play, and it was performed around 1553, though it was written a few years earlier. लिखी पहले गई थी, 1553 में परफॉर्म्ड होती है, and it was published almost 2 decades later. Right? It was published in or around 1562-63, वहां पर पब्लिश होती है, but it was written around 1551 and it was published or it was performed in 1553. The date of composition is disputed, but the balance of opinion suggests that it was written in or about 1552 when Udall was a schoolmaster in London, and some theorize the play was intended for public performance by his students. The work was not published until 1567. Right? It was published in 1567, 11 years after the death of Nicholas Udall. And as you know that initially plays were not written for publication, they were written for performance. उनकी परफॉर्मेंस होती थी जितनी बार पॉसिबल था, और उसके बाद पीपल यूज टू फॉरगेट द स्टोरी, राइट, और नया प्ले आ जाता था. इसलिए इट वाज नॉट मेंट टू बी पब्लिश्ड दो आफ्टर 11 years ऑफ द डेथ. जैसे शेक्सपियर के भी प्लेज पब्लिश हुए थे शेक्सपियर की डेथ के 7 years के बाद, निकोलस उडल के साथ भी सेम घटना घटी थी. राइट, सोर्स की हमने बात की तो रास्टर डॉस्टर सीम्स टू हैव बीन इंस्पायर्ड बाय द वर्क्स ऑफ प्लैटस and Terence. The title character is a variation of braggart soldier. Right? Braggart soldier कौन होता है? Actually इटालिया, जब आप लैटिन कॉमेडी की बात करते हो तो उसमें जो है स्टॉक कैरेक्टर्स हुआ करते थे, और उसी स्टॉक कैरेक्टर्स में से एक कैरेक्टर ये भी है. अगर हम प्लॉट की बात करें तो प्ले को as I told you कि इट इज डिवाइडेड इन 5 acts. 5 acts में तो प्ले डिवाइडेड ही है, and the plot of the play centers on a rich widow, और उसका नाम है क्रिश्चियंस कुटिन्स. राइट, उसका नाम है क्रिश्चियन कुटिन्स, and she is a rich widow. और विडो होने के बाद नाउ शी इज इंटरेस्टेड इन रीमैरिंग. शी इज betrothed टू गविन गुडलक. Right, betrothed to Gavin Goodluck, who is absent when the play opens. Ralph Raster Duster, जो टाइटल कैरेक्टर है, इज इनकरेज्ड बाय अ मैन ट्रिक्स्टर फिगर और उसका नाम है मैथ्यू मैरीग्रीक। He is a trickster। ट्रिक्स्टर कौन होता है? ट्रिक्स्टर होता है वन हु प्लेस ट्रिक ऑन अदर्स, उसको ट्रिक्स्टर कहा जाता है, राइट। तो मैथ्यू मैरीग्रीक इज अ ट्रिक्स्टर एंड he persuades Ralph Rastor Doester to woo Christian Costanze, but his pompous attempts do not succeed. Ralph then tries with his friends and servants to break in and take Christian Costanze by force, but they are defeated by the maid of Christian Costanze and by herself। दोनों मिलकर के पिटाई कर देते हैं, राइट। द मर्चेंट तब तक आ जाता है। गाविन अराइव्ड शॉर्टली आफ्टर एंड द प्ले कंक्लूड्स हैप्पीली विद रिकॉन्सिलिएशन, अ प्रेयर and a song। At the end we see that Gavin Goodluck, who was betrothed to Christian Costanze, they married। वो दोनों शादी कर लेते हैं और ये जो ब्रैगेट का रोल प्ले करता है, his name is Ralph Rastor Doester and he was prompted by Mr. जो है मैथ्यू मैरीग्रीक, राइट, द ट्रिक्स्टर। ये ट्रिक करता है, ट्रिक्स्टर यही जो है ट्रेजेडी में जाकर के विलेन बन जाता है। तो यहाँ पर विलेन नहीं है, यहाँ पर ही इज मेयरली अ टीजर, ही इज अ ट्रिक्स्टर। यहाँ पर वो मैजिक करता है एंड एट हिज बिहेस्ट जो है राल्फ रास्टर डास्टर along with his friends break into the house of Christian Costanze, और जहां पर उनकी बहुत बुरे तरीके से पिटाई कर देती हैं मेड और वो दोनों मिलकर के, राइट। तो दिस वाज द स्टोरी ऑफ द फर्स्ट कॉमेडी, राइट। फर्स्ट कॉमेडी का ये प्लॉट था, फर्स्ट कॉमेडी की ये स्टोरी थी। इसके अलावा एक और प्ले है जिसको कभी कभी जो है लोग रख देते हैं इस कैटेगरी में कि वो पहला प्ले हो सकता है, और उस प्ले का नाम है गैमर गर्टेंस निडल। गैमर गर्टेंस निडल Gammer Garten's Needle. It was written by whom? Mr. William Stevenson. Mr. William Stevenson. It was written by Mr. William Stevenson, who was a fellow of Christ College from 1559 to 1561 and identical with the person of the same name who was fellow of the college from 1551 to 1554 and who appears in the Abershers accounts as the author of the play acted in the year 1553-1554, right? 1553-1554 के अराउंड इसकी एक्टिंग है। Most of the history books says that Gammer Gurton's Needle is an anonymous play, right? हर जगह पर यही लिखा है। There were actually two William Stevensons of the Christ College. एक वो था जो 1559 से लेकर के और 1600 तक का था, 1561 तक था, and identical with the person of the same name who was fellow of the college from 1551 to 1554 वो था। और ऐसा कहा जाता है कि जो 1551 से लेकर के 1554 वाला जो था मिस्टर विलियम स्टीवेंसन, he might have written the play Gammer's Garten Needle, उसने इस प्ले को लिखा होगा, राइट। नो एविडेंस टू द कंट्री, जहां अवेलेबल नहीं है कोई एविडेंस, बट ऐसा मान लिया जाता है। इफ गैमरगैटस निडल इज द प्ले लाइसेंस्ड इन 1563, द परफॉर्मेंस एट क्राइस्ट कॉलेज must have taken place before that date, for it was not the custom to send the play to the press before it had been acted. Right? हमने आपको बताया कि in the beginning plays were written for performance, not for publication, and it was published in 1563. तो एक ये भी critics guess करते हैं it might have been written before the performance, before the publication of the play, और इसलिए भी ये play जो है is credited to have been written by Mr. William Stevenson. उन्होंने इसको लिखा होगा। और एक ये भी तर्क है, it is presumed that he was deprived of his fellowship under Queen Mary and was reinstated under Elizabeth. Whether Stevenson's play of 1559-60 was that given 6 years before or a new one, there is no evidence to show, but the former supposition derives plausibility from the fact that allusions to church matters in Gämmergärtens Nidell seem to indicate a pre-Elizabethan date for its composition. Right? कहने का सेंस ये है कि there are a number of theoreticians, number of historians, number of critics, and they decide the name जो है कि किसने लिखा होगा. There are historical evidence, तो ऐसा कुछ नहीं है कि उसी नहीं लिखा हो, but it is dead sure that there were two William Stevenson, and one of the two might have written the play Gämmergärtens Nidell. Right? दो Gämmergärtens Nidell पर हमको इतनी बात नहीं करनी है. जो हमारा मुद्दा है Gämmergärtens Nidell का, it is supposedly the first comedy, और कॉमेडी कम ये अपने आप में जो है फार्स ज्यादा है. राइट? सम हिस्टोरियंस ऐसे भी हैं जिनका ये मानना है कि Gämmergärtens Nidell जो है इट इज द फर्स्ट फार्स, और कुछ इसको सेकंड कॉमेडी में भी रखते हैं कि ये सेकंड कॉमेडी है, फर्स्ट बीइंग राल्फ रास्टर डैस्टो. एक नाम और कभी कभी जुड़ जाता है कि ये जो प्ले है जॉन स्टिल ने इस प्ले को लिखा होगा. राइट? जॉन स्टिल वाज द राइटर, बॉर्न इन 1543 and died in or around 1607. Right? He was also the student of Cambridge University. तो एक क्रेडिट उनके पास भी है इसकी लिखने की, तो हम बहुत ज्यादा डिटेल्स पर नहीं जाएंगे, उसके ऑथरशिप पे नहीं जाएंगे. क्लियर? Gämmergärtens Nidell is the second earliest extant English comedy properly so called. Still, whose reputation as a serious churchman cannot easily be reconciled with the buffoonery in a right pithy, pleasant and merry comedy entitled Gämmergärtens Nidell, was first credited with its authorship by Isaac Reed in 1782. Right? But 1782 में ये बताया गया कि जॉन स्टिल ने इसको लिखा है, बट एविडेंस इसका भी है कि ये विलियम स्टीवेंसन का होगा. ऐसे डाउटफुल क्वेश्चंस वैसे पेपर में नहीं आते, और अगर आएंगे तो फिर विलियम स्टीवेंसन पर ही आप आंसर क्लिक करके आइएगा. क्लियर? आइए नेक्स्ट प्ले की तरफ चलते हैं, और जो नेक्स्ट प्ले है इट इज द फर्स्ट ट्रेजेडी. गार्बडेक और फेरेक्स एंड पोरेक्स. The first full-length tragedy. पहली फुल लेंथ ट्रेजेडी कौन सी है? आई डोंट थिंक दैट यू नीड टू बी टोल्ड द नेम. इट वॉज Gorboduc. Gorboduc with the subtitle The names of the two sons of Gorboduc, Ferrex and Porrex. The tragedy of Gorboduc, Ferrex and Porrex. The tragedy of Gorboduc, Ferrex or Porrex is a first tragedy in 1561, first performed in 1561. Means in Greek literature ट्रेजेडी के बाद कॉमेडी आती है और इन इंग्लिश लिटरेचर कॉमेडी पहले आती है और ट्रेजेडी बाद में आती है. इंग्लिश पीपल दे सॉट एंटरटेनमेंट इन कॉमेडी और जो ग्रीक थे दे सॉट एंटरटेनमेंट इन ट्रेजेडी. दे बिलीव्ड इन ट्रैजिक प्लेजर. और जब ट्रेजेडी इंग्लैंड में आती है स्पेशली ड्यूरिंग द रेन ऑफ क्वीन एलिजाबेथ, तो यहाँ पर भी एक सेंस डेवलप होता है जिसको ट्रैजिक प्लेजर कहा जाता है. एंड एलिजाबेथन्स एंजॉयड शेक्सपियरियन ट्रेजेडीज एक्सटेंसिवली एंड शेक्सपियर वाज पावर्ड बाय द ऑडियंसेस पावर. राइट, उसी से पावर्ड होते थे और इसीलिए ही रोट जो है a number of tragedies, love tragedies, problem play tragedies, tragic comedies and full length tragedies like Hamlet, Macbeth, King Lear and Othello. First tragedy जिस पर उन्होंने अपनी ट्रेजेडी खड़ा किया, जिस पर बेस किया, it was performed at the Christmas celebration in Inner Temple in 1561 and it was performed in the same year in front of Queen Elizabeth. Right, in 1561 it was performed in the palace of Queen Elizabeth. उनके महल में उनके सामने भी ये परफॉर्म हुई थी. And the tragedy was written by two authors. Right, means the first tragedy was written in collaboration. The first three acts were written by someone else and the remaining two acts जो थे वो किसी और ने ही लिखे थे. और though the name of ये ट्रेजेडी जो है इट इज नॉट एनोनिमसली रिटन, इट वाज रिटन बाय जो है थॉमस शैकविल एंड थॉमस नॉर्टन. राइट, दो लोगों ने मिलकर के इसको लिखा था, थॉमस नॉर्टन एंड थॉमस शैकविल. Thomas Norton and Thomas Shackwell, right? They are said to be responsible. जो है Thomas Norton wrote the first three acts and Thomas Shackwell wrote the second two acts. Right? ये अलग अलग लोगों ने लिखा है, दो लोगों ने मिलकर के, Norton and Shackwell ने. Right? The first quarto published by the bookseller William Griffith, right, in 1565. Second authorized quarto फिर आता है 5 साल के बाद. The play is notable for several reasons. As it was the first tragedy, एक तो ये है, दूसरा ये है कि it was the first verse drama in English. Right, first verse drama in English. It means the tragedy, the first comedy, Ralph Roster was not written in verse form, instead in prose form. First verse drama. First verse drama ये था इंग्लिश में. राइट, और पहला ऐसा वर्स ड्रामा था जिसको ब्लैंक वर्स में लिखा गया था. फर्स्ट वर्स ड्रामा इन ब्लैंक वर्स. वैसे इंग्लैंड में सबसे पहले ब्लैंक वर्स किसने यूज किया था? अगर ऐसा क्वेश्चन बनता है, हु यूज्ड ब्लैंक वर्स फॉर द फर्स्ट टाइम, देन इट वाज अर्ल ऑफ सरी. ही हैड ट्रांसलेटेड the second and fourth book of Virgil's Aeneid in blank verse. Right? वर्जिल की एनीड की सेकंड और फोर्थ बुक जो है अर्ल ऑफ सरे ने ट्रांसलेट की थी, ब्लैंक वर्स उन्होंने सबसे पहले अप्लाई किया था, और फिर वो ब्लैंक वर्स जो है थॉमस शैकबिल और नॉर्टन ने अप्लाई किया अपने फर्स्ट ट्रेजेडी के लिए। राइट? और दूसरी बात यह है कि इसका जो पॉलिटिकल सब्जेक्ट मैटर है वो भी अपने आप का पहला प्ले था। राइट? इट वाज द फर्स्ट पॉलिटिकल प्ले, फर्स्ट पॉलिटिकल प्ले है और फर्स्ट रिवेंज प्ले भी आप इसको कह सकते हैं। फर्स्ट पॉलिटिकल प्ले and first revenge play. Right? It can be seen as a forerunner of the whole trend that would later produce plays like Titus Andronicus and King Lear. It also provides the first well-documented performance of a play in Ireland. सिनॉप्सिस की अगर हम बात करें, प्ले के मेन थीम की बात करें, मेन कैरेक्टर की बात करें, तो जो गार्बेडक होता है जिसके नाम पर प्ले है ये, गार्बेडक वाज द किंग ऑफ ब्रिटेन। बिल्कुल वैसे जैसे लियर, किंग लियर जो है वो भी ब्रिटेन का ही किंग होता है। गार्बेडक वाज द किंग ऑफ ब्रिटेन and when he grew older, he divided his kingdom into two parts. फेरिक्स और पोरेक्स में उसको डिवाइड करके दे दिया था। राइट? The sons fell to dissension. The younger killed the elder. Younger Porrex ने one day he overhears that Ferrex wants to kill him और इसलिए he does the same thing first and Porrex kills Ferrex. Ferrex was dearly loved to his mother. मदर को अपने बहुत प्यारा था और रिजल्ट ये हुआ कि when mother came to know about the murder of Ferrex by Porrex, she comes and in a fit of temper, mother kills Porrex. And in this way, both the brothers were killed. दोनों की डेथ हो जाती है. The younger killed the elder. The mother that more dearly loved the elder for revenge killed the younger. The people, moved with the cruelty of the fact, rose in rebellion and slew both king and queen. Right? फादर और मदर दोनों को मार देते हैं लोग जब वो ये देखते हैं कि their kings have been killed. Right? Both Gorboduc and his wife Widena were murdered. Widena was the wife of Gorboduc and mother to Ferrex and Porrex. उसको मार देते हैं. राइट? जनता आती है और उसको मार देती है रिबेलियन में. नाउ द नोबिलिटी असेंबल्ड एंड मोस्ट टेरिबली. जी हाँ, नोबिलिटी क्या काम करती है कि जो रिबेलियंस थे, जो रिबेल्स थे, दे वर किल्ड बाय द नोबिलिटी. नोबिलिटी उनको मार करके खत्म कर देती है. राइट? द नोबिलिटी असेंबल्ड एंड मोस्ट टेरिबली डिस्ट्रॉयड द रिबेल्स and afterward for want of the issue of the prince whereby the succession of the crown became uncertain, they fell to civil war in which both they and many of their issues were slain and the land for a long time almost desolate and miserably wasted. Right? सब का सब खत्म हो जाता है. And the play was also inspired from the contemporary event. After the death of King Henry VII in 1549, what happens? Sir King Henry VIII क्या होता है? His sickly and younger जो son होता है Edward VI throne पर आता है and he died within 8 years of his ruling. right? And then Mary, the eldest daughter of Henry VIII, becomes the monarch. और उसके बाद when she died in 1558, Queen Elizabeth came to the throne. And who after Queen Elizabeth? So there was a question of जो है author question of who will be the next king, और उसी next king पर ये पूरा प्ले ही आधारित था, पूरा प्ले ही बेस्ड था कि who will rule after Gorboduc. किंग के सन्स मार दिए जाते हैं, किंग खुद मार दिया जाता है, रिबेलियन हो जाता है, नोबिलिटी आती है, रिबेलियन को मार देती है, एंड देन सिविल वॉर, राइट. तो दिस वाज द फर्स्ट प्ले रिटन इन ब्लैंक वर्स, फर्स्ट फुल लेंथ ट्रेजेडी, and the first tragedy based on the Spanish tragedy, revenge tragedy we have, as in revenge Vidna kills Porrex, उसको मार देती है, and the public wants to take revenge, और in revenge they kill king and queen, उनको मार देते हैं, और फिर queen और king को जो मारता है उन पर revenge लेती है nobility, और फिर nobility rebellions को मारती है. तो the full play जो है The play was completely a violent play, violence पर आधारित है, murder पर आधारित है, cruelty पर based था, right? Gorboduc announces his plan to divide his kingdom between his sons Ferrex and Porrex. His counselors advise against it, reminding him of the conflict that arose between the cousins Morgan and Cunebag when Britain was divided between them, which led to Morgan's death. Gorboduc appreciates their advice but goes ahead with his plan. Ferrex is advised by the parasite Hermund to take the whole kingdom. Tyndale tells Porrex that his brother is making plans for war, meaning Porrex decides to invade Ferrex's realm. Darden writes to Gorboduc of this. Gorboduc bewails this and is advised to raise a force against them. However, a messenger then enters bearing the news of Ferrex's death. Porrex meets his father and justifies his action, saying that he was content to rule his kingdom, but that his brother plotted to take his lands. However, his mother Videna then stabs him dead while he is sleeping in revenge for Porrex. Right? The people rise up in anger and kill both her and Gorboduc, blaming the king for Porrex's death. The nobles prepare to act against the rebels. However, the succession is left uncertain. Fergus, Duke of Albany, plans to gain the throne and begins raising an army while his friends try to gather support. The nobles defeat the rebels but hear that Fergus has raised an army and intends to take the crown. The nobles opposes Fergus, thinking of him as a foreign invader. Arestus says that Parliament must decide upon a new king. Ebullus bemoans the chaos that has happened to the country and says that Parliament should have been called while the king was alive, but that justice will eventually prevail. Right? This was the whole story of the play, जिसको हम फर्स्ट ट्रेजेडी कहते हैं. क्लियर? आइए अब हम ट्रेजेडी से थोड़ा सा आगे की तरफ बढ़ते हैं, और आगे की तरफ बढ़ करके कहाँ पहुंचेंगे? आगे की तरफ बढ़ करके हम यूनिवर्सिटी विट्स पर आते हैं, और यूनिवर्सिटी विट्स से हम कहाँ जाएंगे? हम थिएटर्स की बात करेंगे कि थिएटर्स का डेवलपमेंट कैसे होता है. राइट? एंड एज फार एज योर सिलेबस इज कंसर्न, योर सिलेबस इज डिवाइडेड इनटू पोएट्री, इनटू ड्रामा, इनटू प्रोज, बट हम उस तरीके से डिवाइड नहीं कर सकते as I alone am teacher here, right? और इसलिए मैं आपको एज वाइज ले चलता हूँ. उस एज की पोएट्री, उस एज का ड्रामा, उस एज का प्रोज, उस एज का क्रिटिसिज्म, सब कुछ हमको ही करना है. तो फिर हम अलग अलग क्यों डिवाइड करें? हिस्ट्री में एक साथ ही लेकर के चलते हैं, एंड दैट विल बी अ बिट इजियर फॉर यू एंड अ बिट इजियर फॉर मी. हमारे लिए और आपके लिए, दोनों के लिए वो थोड़ा सा आसानी होगा अगर हम एज वाइज चलेंगे तो. राइट? तो हम ड्रामा पर ही अभी पहले ड्रामा की बात कर लेते हैं, और फिर हम इस एज की पोएट्री पर भी आएंगे. यद्यपि हमने पोएट्री से शुरुआत की थी, टॉर्टल्स मिसालिनी से. माय इंटेंशन वाज नॉट टू स्टार्ट पोएट्री, but my intention was to open Elizabethan age, and Elizabethan age opens with Tortles Miscellany. That's why I first discussed Tortles Miscellany, and then I talked about the first comedy, Ralph Ruster Duster, and then Gammergurten's Needle, and then the first verse drama in blank verse, first revenge play, first tragedy, Gorboduc, the tragedy of Gorboduc, Ferrex or Ferrex and Porrex. Right? University wits. University, there were actually two universities in England at that time, and Oxford University and Cambridge University. And scholars of Cambridge University and scholars of Oxford University, they didn't form any group. They were later put into the group, right? They a few of the scholars from Cambridge and Oxford were expert in dramatic arts, right? They were expert in literary activities, and they started to write plays, they started to issue pamphlets, they started to write poetry and some of the great poetry, right? They were the beginners, they were the initiators of Elizabethan literature, आप ये कह सकते हो. And later a historian termed, he coined the phrase university wits and divided and put all the scholars of the time into that umbrella, into that group, जिसको हम यूनिवर्सिटी विट्स कहते हैं. Christopher Marlowe, Robert Greene, George Peele, Thomas Nash, right? Marlowe, Robert Greene, George Peele, Thomas Nash, these were the important university wits, right? These were the important university wits, right? Though there were a few as well, कुछ और भी थे, उनके अलावा भी सिर्फ इतने ही नहीं थे, but they are less known. उसमें है जॉन लिली and Thomas Lodge. John Lilly and Thomas Lodge. Sometimes the name of Thomas Kidd is also put under the university wits, but he was the student of neither university. ना तो ऑक्सफोर्ड के स्टूडेंट थे और ना तो वो कैम्ब्रिज के स्टूडेंट थे, इसलिए दोनों को वहां से बाहर रखते हैं. क्रिस्टोफर मार्लो, रॉबर्ट ग्रीन and Thomas Nash, these three were from Cambridge, right? Christopher Marlowe, Robert Greene and Thomas Nash, these three were from Cambridge, and George Peele, John Lilly, Thomas Lodge, these three were from Oxford universities. John Lilly, Thomas Lodge, George Peele were from Oxford University, right? And the term university wits was not used in their lifetime, but it was coined by George Saintsbury in the 19th century. Right? The phrase university wits was coined by a 19th century historian, George Saintsbury. Right? There was no term like university wits during the lifetime of Christopher Marlowe, Robert Greene, George Peele, Nash, Lilly, Thomas Kidd, but it was coined, it was invented by a 19th century historian और उसका नाम था जॉर्ज सेंट्सबरी, और तब से इनको यूनिवर्सिटी बिट्स कहा जाने लगा है. एंड दे आर नॉट मेयरली phrase university bits, but they were the makers, they were the shapers of William Shakespeare. William Shakespeare only knew little Latin and less Greek, but he had read the works written by these prominent writers, by these significant writers of the time, and he based his works. He took raw material from the works of the university bits, modified them and make them his own. उसको बनाने का काम किया है. इसलिए I say that they are the shapers, they are the makers of William Shakespeare. Or you could say कि we are going to study drama before Shakespeare, right? Drama before Shakespeare. Then the most important writer is Christopher Marlowe, and I will discuss the works of these university bits in my next class. I hope you would have enjoyed the class. You would have got some benefit from the class. It would have been beneficial for you, right? Note down your questions after watching the entire video, and in the next class ask your question first. I will be responding to you, and then I will start university bits and their works one by one. All right, thank you very much for being with me. Thank you. Good luck.